The City Beneath Blackwater Lake, a recovered documentary horror story, written and narrated by Gregory Sparrow. Welcome to Whispers of Shadow. Prologue. There is a lake in Northern America that does not appear on every map. Most locals call it Blackwater Lake. A deep, cold body of water surrounded by dense pine forests and steep cliffs. The lake is old, much older than the nearby towns, older than the roads, older than the names people gave it. For more than a century, fishermen, hikers, and hunters have shared stories about strange lights appearing above its surface during violent storms. Small lights at first, then entire rows of glowing windows, the outlines of buildings, church towers, bridges, a city made of light rising from the darkness beneath the water. Most people dismissed the stories as folklore, weather phenomena, optical illusions, alcohol-fueled campfire tales. But the stories never disappeared. Generation after generation continued to tell them. And every account included the same detail. The city always appeared during thunderstorms, and it always vanished before sunrise. No photographs existed, no reliable recordings, no proof until 2026. The following report is based on recovered expedition logs, sonar scans, diver recordings, satellite imagery, and emergency transmissions recovered from Blackwater Lake Research Project BW-17. Several portions of the original files remain classified. Others were damaged. What follows is a reconstruction of what may be the most disturbing discovery ever made beneath a freshwater lake. Because the team that entered Blackwater Lake believed they were searching for geological anomalies. Instead, they found a city. And according to the final recordings, the city was not abandoned. The descent chamber trembled as it was lowered into the darkness. Inside were 3 divers: Ethan Mercer, Rebecca Hall, Daniel Voss, all experienced professionals, all trained for extreme underwater operations. The city lay nearly 300 meters below them, far deeper than any normal archaeological survey. The only sounds inside the chamber were breathing and the constant groan of metal cables. Above them, sunlight faded, then disappeared completely. Blackwater Lake swallowed the last traces of daylight. The world outside became a cold abyss. At 150 meters, Rebecca reported seeing unusual reflections, small flashes of light, far below. At first, nobody paid attention. Natural minerals sometimes reflected artificial illumination, but the flashes continued, and they seemed to move. The control vessel ordered the team to continue. At 220 meters, Daniel suddenly stopped speaking. "Ethan." "What?" "You see that?" The camera rotated downward. The operators on the surface fell silent. The city was visible. Not through sonar, not through digital reconstruction, visible. Massive stone towers emerged from the darkness below. Entire streets stretched beneath them. The city looked untouched, as though it had been frozen in time. No collapsed buildings, no erosion, no damage. It looked alive. Nobody could explain it. The chamber finally touched the lake bed. For several seconds, nobody moved. The divers simply stared. Rows of buildings vanished into the darkness. Statues lined the streets. Ancient street lamps stood perfectly upright. Every structure appeared preserved. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. The hatch opened. The divers stepped into the city and immediately noticed something strange. There was almost no sediment. After centuries underwater, every surface should have been buried beneath layers of mud. Yet, the roads were clean. The stonework was visible. Even footprints would have remained visible if anyone had walked there. The team began moving toward the central district. Every step echoed through the silent city. The cameras transmitted everything. Thousands of viewers inside government research centers watched in complete silence. No one spoke. No one wanted to break the illusion, because the city no longer looked abandoned. It looked occupied, not by people, but by presence. The feeling grew stronger with every street they crossed, as though someone was watching from behind every dark window, as though the city knew they were there. After 30 minutes of exploration, the team reached a public square. At its center stood a fountain, or what appeared to be a fountain. The structure rose nearly 15 meters high. Hundreds of carved human figures covered its surface. Every face showed terror. Screaming mouths, wide eyes, hands reaching upward, trying to escape. Rebecca moved closer. Her flashlight illuminated the stone. Then she froze. Ethan. What? These aren't carvings. The camera zoomed in. The surface wasn't carved. It was molded like impressions, as though real bodies had been pressed into stone. Nobody answered. For nearly 10 seconds, the control room remained silent. Then, the expedition director ordered them to continue. Nobody wanted to stay near the fountain, not after seeing the faces, not after noticing something else. Every face appeared unique, different ages, different features, different expressions. Thousands of people trapped forever inside the stone. An hour into the dive, they reached the central structure, the circular building from the sonar scans. Up close, it was enormous, nearly 200 meters across. Its walls disappeared into the darkness above. Massive black pillars surrounded the entrance. Ancient symbols covered every surface. No language expert could identify them. The symbols appeared to change depending on the camera angle. Some technicians later claimed the recordings themselves were changing, but nobody could prove it. The entrance stood open, a perfect black void. Daniel laughed nervously. I think every horror movie ever made says we shouldn't go in there. Nobody laughed. The team entered. The lights illuminated a gigantic chamber. Rows of stone seats surrounded a central platform, like an underground amphitheater or a place of worship. Thousands could have gathered there, perhaps tens of thousands. The platform itself stood empty, at least initially. Then Ethan noticed something. A chair, a single chair placed in the center, facing upward, toward the lake surface, toward the world above. And sitting on the chair was a human skeleton. For several seconds, nobody moved. The skeleton remained perfectly still, seated in the center of the enormous chamber, facing upward, toward the surface, toward the distant world above Blackwater Lake. Ethan slowly approached. Every step echoed through the building. The sound seemed wrong, not underwater, not muffled. The echoes sounded as though they were traveling through dry air. Rebecca noticed it too. So, we're all hearing that, right? Nobody answered, because everyone was hearing it. The acoustics made no sense. Nothing about the city made sense anymore. The skeleton appeared ancient. Its clothing had mostly decayed, yet parts remained intact. Dark fabric, buttons, fragments of a coat. Ethan carefully examined the remains. Then his breathing suddenly changed. Fast, uneven, panicked. Ethan! Rebecca stepped closer. What is it? The diver didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward the skeleton's wrist. A watch. Old, corroded, but still recognizable. The surface crew zoomed the camera. Everyone in the control room leaned forward. The watch displayed a date. October 12th, 1989. The same day, a small research vessel vanished on Blackwater Lake. The disappearance had never been solved. 5 people had been aboard. None were ever found. Until now. The team searched the surrounding area. More remains appeared. Then more. And more. Rows of skeletons. Hundreds of them. All seated. All facing upward. As though waiting. Watching. Listening. Some looked centuries old. Others appeared surprisingly recent. Several still wore modern clothing. One skeleton wore hiking boots, manufactured less than 5 years earlier. Nobody could explain it. How could people from different centuries end up in the same place? The answer arrived sooner than anyone expected. Daniel's flashlight swept across a nearby wall. Something reflected the beam. Metal. A plaque. Covered in names. Thousands of names. The camera zoomed in. The control room immediately began cross-checking databases. Missing persons. Boating accidents. disappearances, cold cases. The results came back within minutes. Every name matched a real missing person. People who had vanished near Blackwater Lake. Across more than 100 years, the oldest entry dated back to 1871. The newest was only 6 months old. Silence filled the control room because one fact had become impossible to ignore. Nobody had left the city. Then Rebecca noticed another name, one that hadn't been reported, one that shouldn't have existed, her own. Rebecca Hall, the exact spelling, the exact date of birth, carved into the stone. Below it was a date, a future date, 3 weeks from now. Rebecca immediately stepped backward. No. Her voice trembled. No, no, no. Ethan stared at the wall. Daniel stared at the wall. The surface crew stared at the wall. Then more names began appearing, not carved. Appearing, slowly emerging from the stone itself, as though invisible ink was becoming visible. Daniel Voss, Ethan Mercer, members of the research team. Every single diver, every operator, every scientist aboard the vessel, all listed. All assigned dates, future dates, different dates, but all within the next year. The expedition director immediately ordered evacuation. The mission was terminated. The divers turned toward the exit. And that was when the first scream came through the radio. Not from inside the city, from the surface, the control vessel. The transmission exploded with static. People shouting, running, alarms. Then a voice emerged, broken, terrified. The lights, more static. They're everywhere. Another scream. Then silence. Absolute silence. The divers tried calling the vessel. No response. Only static. Then a new voice appeared. Soft, calm, almost whispering. A voice none of them recognized, yet somehow felt familiar. The voice spoke directly into their communication system. Why are you leaving? The divers froze. The voice continued. You came all this way. Static crackled. Then, stay. The transmission ended, but something else happened. The lights inside the building turned on, one by one. Thousands of lights, across the walls, across the ceiling, across the distant streets outside. The city was waking up, and somewhere beyond the entrance, something moved. Not a shadow, not a fish. A crowd. Thousands of figures standing motionless in the darkness, watching the building, watching the divers, watching, waiting. And then all of them started walking toward the central structure. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. The cameras remained fixed on the approaching figures. Thousands of silhouettes moved through the streets, slowly, deliberately, like citizens returning home after centuries away. Their movements were unnatural, not floating, not swimming, walking across the lake bed, 300 meters beneath the surface. Ethan. Rebecca's voice barely escaped her throat. They're people. No. Daniel stared into the darkness. They used to be. The approaching crowd became clearer. Their clothing belonged to different eras. Victorian coats, military uniforms, modern jackets, fishing gear, diving suits. Every decade, every century, all mixed together, all moving toward the central structure, toward the chair, toward the skeleton. Then Ethan realized something horrifying. Many of them matched photographs from missing persons reports, faces recovered from old newspaper archives, people who had vanished around Blackwater Lake. Some had disappeared a century ago, others only months earlier, yet they looked unchanged. No decay, no damage. Their skin was pale, their eyes completely black, but they were still recognizable, still human, at least on the surface. The crowd stopped, exactly 50 meters from the entrance. Thousands of motionless figures, not a single one moved, not a single one blinked. They simply stood there, watching, waiting. Then every head turned upward simultaneously, toward the lake surface, toward the world above. The communication system suddenly came alive. Static exploded through every headset. A voice emerged. Not one voice, hundreds, thousands, speaking together, different ages, different accents, different languages, merged into one impossible sound. We waited. The divers froze. The voices continued. We kept the gate closed. Another burst of static. We kept it sleeping. The lights inside the city began flickering. Street lamps illuminated. Windows glowed. Buildings awakened. The dead city suddenly looked alive, as though the last several centuries had never happened, as though its inhabitants had simply returned home. Then the ground shook. A deep vibration rolled through the streets. Every camera trembled. Every light flickered. The lake bed itself seemed to move. Far below, much deeper than the city, something enormous shifted, something sleeping beneath the ruins. The voice returned, this time softer, almost sad. It knows you are here. The vibration came again, stronger. A crack appeared across the floor beneath the chair. Stone shattered. Ancient dust erupted upward, and from the darkness below, a light emerged. Not white, not blue. A deep green glow, like something rising from impossible depths. The crack widened. 10 meters, 20, 30. The entire chamber began collapsing. The crowd outside didn't move, didn't run, didn't react, as though they had seen this happen before, as though they had been waiting for it. Then the cameras captured something. Only 3 frames survived, 3 frames removed from official archives. 3 frames later leaked online. In those frames, something looked back. An eye. A single colossal eye opening beneath the city. Larger than a building. Larger than the entire chamber. Impossible in scale. Impossible in existence. Yet visible. Watching. Awake. Daniel screamed. Not because he saw the eye, because the eye saw him. Every sensor on his suit immediately failed. Heart monitor, oxygen telemetry, navigation systems. Everything died simultaneously. His camera continued transmitting for exactly 8 seconds. The footage remains classified. But eyewitness reports from the control room described the same thing. Daniel stopped moving, stopped speaking, stopped breathing, then slowly turned toward Ethan, smiled, and stepped into the crack. No hesitation, no resistance. He simply walked into the darkness below and vanished. Rebecca began crying. Ethan grabbed her arm. "We leave now." For the first time since entering the city, the crowd moved, not toward them, away from them. Thousands of figures turning their backs, walking toward the streets, toward their homes, toward the glowing city, as though their duty had ended, as though something had finally replaced them. Above Blackwater Lake, the storm had already begun. Lightning struck the water. Thunder shook the mountains. Satellite imagery later revealed something impossible. For 13 minutes, another city appeared on the lake surface. A reflection. A mirror image. Glowing towers rising through fog, visible from miles away. Hundreds of witnesses reported seeing it. Most recordings later disappeared. Others were confiscated. The few remaining videos are heavily corrupted. But every witness described the same thing. Someone was standing at the highest tower, watching the shoreline, watching the world, waiting, and beneath the lake, something ancient was beginning to rise. The ascent should have taken 20 minutes. It took nearly 2 hours because something followed them. Not physically, not through the water, through the radios, through the cameras, through every electronic system connected to the city. As Ethan and Rebecca climbed toward the surface, voices continued appearing inside their headsets. At first, they sounded distant, then closer, then personal. The voices knew things, private things, childhood memories, names, dreams. regrets, secrets. Every sentence was spoken by people who should not have known them, people who should not have existed. Rebecca heard her dead father, a man who had died 12 years earlier. The voice sounded perfect. Every pause, every breath, every detail. Rebecca. Her breathing accelerated. Rebecca, please don't leave. Ethan grabbed her shoulder. Ignore it. But Rebecca couldn't, because the voice sounded real, more real than the lake, more real than the city, more real than the world itself. Then Ethan heard someone too, his wife, Emily Mercer, dead since 2021, killed in a highway accident. The same voice, the same tone, the same laugh. Ethan. Silence. Then, I've been waiting. The ascent chamber continued rising. Slowly, painfully slowly, and below them, the city grew brighter. Thousands of lights illuminated the darkness, entire districts awakening, streets glowing beneath the lake, like a civilization returning from the dead. At 180 meters, the first emergency beacon activated. The surface vessel finally responded. Weak, distorted, almost destroyed. Ethan. Static. If you can hear us. More static. Do not return to the vessel. Ethan stared upward. What? The transmission continued. Do not return. The message ended. Seconds later, a second transmission arrived. Identical voice, identical frequency, identical speaker. Yet the words were different. Ethan. Pause. Come home. The divers looked at each other. Neither needed to speak. Something had copied the crew. Something had copied their voices. And it was already above them. When they finally reached the surface, the storm had transformed Blackwater Lake into chaos. Lightning illuminated enormous waves. Rain hammered the water. Visibility had fallen to almost zero, but the vessel remained visible. At least, something remained visible. Rebecca noticed it first. The lights. The ship's lights were wrong. Every window glowed green, the same green light that had emerged from beneath the city. The same light from the crack, the same light from the eye. The vessel drifted silently. No radio communication, no movement, no crew visible on deck, just darkness and green light. The chamber docked automatically. The hatch opened. The storm roared outside. Neither diver moved. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. Then, a figure appeared on deck, standing perfectly still, watching them. One of the scientists, Dr. Henry Collins, lead geologist, officially alive, officially aboard the vessel. Yet Ethan immediately understood something was wrong. because Henry Collins was smiling far too widely, far too long, and he wasn't blinking. The figure raised one arm slowly, mechanically, inviting them aboard. Rebecca stepped backward. No, the figure didn't react, didn't move, didn't blink, just continued smiling, standing beneath the rain. Then dozens more figures appeared. Scientists, engineers, crew members, every member of the expedition, standing motionless on deck, smiling, watching, waiting. The real crew was nowhere to be seen. Lightning struck nearby. For a split second, the entire vessel became visible, and the cameras captured something horrifying. The people on deck were not wet, not despite the storm, not despite standing in the rain. Not a single drop touched them, as though the rain passed through them, as though they weren't truly there. Then every figure spoke simultaneously. Thousands of voices hidden behind human mouths. One sentence, one impossible sentence. We opened it. The storm intensified. The lake exploded with movement, and far below, something enormous struck the underside of the city. The entire lake shook. The mountains shook. The world shook. And for the first time in recorded history, Blackwater Lake began to drain. The readings had to be wrong. Blackwater Lake contained billions of tons of water. Entire rivers fed into it. There was nowhere for that water to go. And yet, every sensor aboard the expedition vessel reported the same impossible fact. The lake level was falling rapidly. 1 meter, then 2, then 5. Within minutes, sections of the shoreline that had been underwater for centuries became exposed. Satellite operators watching from orbit thought their equipment had malfunctioned. They recalibrated, ran diagnostics, checked alternative satellites. The results never changed. Blackwater Lake was emptying. As the water level dropped, more of the city became visible. Entire towers emerged from the darkness. Ancient bridges broke through the surface. Stone rooftops appeared among the waves. For the first time in history, the city beneath Blackwater Lake was rising. The figures aboard the vessel never moved, never blinked, never stopped smiling. As the water receded around them, they simply stood there, watching Ethan, watching Rebecca, watching the storm. Then, every radio frequency on Earth began receiving the same transmission. Military channels, commercial radio, emergency frequencies, weather satellites, civil aviation networks, even private communications. The message lasted exactly 31 seconds. Millions heard it. Nobody understood it. A voice, deep, ancient, immense, speaking words that sounded almost human. Almost. The recording was later analyzed by hundreds of experts. No language matched. No translation succeeded. Yet, listeners reported understanding fragments. Different fragments. Different meanings. Almost as if the message adapted itself to whoever heard it. One pilot later claimed he heard, "The door is open." A naval officer reported hearing, "The keepers have failed." A child in Oregon wrote only 3 words in a school notebook the next day. "It remembers us." Nobody could explain any of it. Then the seismic events began. Not earthquakes. Something else. Deep beneath the lake bed, far below the city, far below the eye. Something enormous was moving, ascending. Meanwhile, Ethan and Rebecca remained trapped. The vessel had become inaccessible. The smiling figures still occupied every deck, every hallway, every doorway, and the storm continued growing stronger. Then Rebecca noticed something floating nearby. A photograph, old, water damaged. The image showed Blackwater Lake, but it wasn't modern. The cars were wrong. The clothing was wrong. The photograph had clearly been taken decades earlier, maybe longer, and yet the city was already visible, standing above the water, fully exposed, exactly as it was now. On the back of the photograph were 4 words, written by hand, faded, barely readable. It happened before. Ethan felt his stomach drop, because suddenly everything made sense. Not the city, not the eye, not the voices, but the disappearances, the missing people, the legends, the stories. This wasn't the first emergence. It wasn't even close. The city had risen before, again and again, across generations, perhaps across centuries. Every time it rose, people vanished. Records disappeared. Memories became distorted. And eventually, the city sank again, leaving only myths behind. The realization terrified him more than the city itself, because it meant humanity had already lost many times, and nobody remembered. A violent impact shook the vessel. Then another. Then another. Something massive struck from below. The hull groaned. Metal twisted. Windows exploded. The smiling figures did not react. They simply turned toward the lake, toward something approaching from the darkness. The water around them began glowing green, not in patches, everywhere. The entire lake transformed into an ocean of emerald light. The storm clouds above reflected it. The mountains reflected it. The sky itself seemed infected by it. Then something broke the surface. Not fully, only a small portion, and that small portion was larger than an office building. A black structure covered in impossible patterns, moving slowly upward. At first, Ethan thought it was stone. Then he saw it blink. It wasn't a structure. It wasn't a mountain. It wasn't part of the city. It was part of the thing beneath it. And the city was only the lock. The thing continued rising, slowly, deliberately, as though it had all the time in the world, as though it had waited for this moment longer than human civilization itself. The exposed portion stretched hundreds of meters across, black, smooth, impossible. No visible eyes, no mouth, no recognizable anatomy. Yet every person who later reviewed the footage described the same sensation. They felt observed, studied, measured. Like insects beneath a microscope, the city around it trembled. Entire towers collapsed into the lowering water. Ancient bridges shattered. The streets that had remained intact for centuries began falling apart. The lock was breaking, and whatever had been imprisoned beneath Blackwater Lake was finally free. The smiling figures aboard the vessel suddenly stopped moving. Every head turned toward the emerging mass. Every smile disappeared. For the first time, they looked afraid. One by one, they began walking, not toward Ethan, not toward Rebecca, toward the lake, toward the city, toward the thing below. Then they started jumping, silently, hundreds of figures diving into the glowing water. No screams, no hesitation, no resistance, as though obeying a command, as though returning somewhere. The radios exploded with voices, thousands of them, the missing, the dead, the lost, everyone whose name had appeared on the walls beneath the city. This time, the message was clear, crystal clear. The same sentence repeated endlessly. Close it. Close it. Close it. Rebecca stared at Ethan. What do they mean? Before he could answer, the voice returned. The ancient voice. The one that had spoken through every radio frequency on Earth. Except now, it wasn't speaking from the radios. It was speaking from everywhere. The sky, the water, the mountains, the storm, the world itself. And for the first time, it spoke English. I remember the first sun. Thunder exploded overhead. I remember the first ocean. The mountains shook. I remember when this world belonged to us. The vessel lurched violently. The hull split open. Metal screamed. The ship began sinking. Ethan grabbed Rebecca. They jumped. The freezing waters swallowed them instantly. Around them, chaos erupted. The lake had become a graveyard of collapsing structures, broken towers, ancient ruins, fragments of a city older than history itself. Then Ethan saw something impossible. The eye, the enormous eye beneath the city, the same eye that had opened below the amphitheater. Only now he could see its true size. The eye alone was larger than the entire city. The realization shattered his understanding of reality. The city had never been built above the creature. The city had been built around it, around a tiny fraction of it, around one eye, one fragment, one piece. Whatever existed beneath Blackwater Lake was so vast that human beings had mistaken part of its body for an entire landscape. Then Ethan noticed movement. Far below, thousands of lights, the inhabitants of the city, the missing people, the watchers, the keepers. They weren't serving the creature, they were fighting it. They always had been, for generations, for centuries, possibly for millennia. The city had never been a prison. The city had been a barricade, a final defense, a sacrifice, and humanity had destroyed it. The realization came too late, because the eye blinked, and suddenly Ethan remembered things that had never happened. Cities burning beneath unfamiliar stars, oceans covering continents, civilizations older than humanity, entire species erased from existence. Memories poured into his mind, not his memories, its memories. Millions of years, billions, time beyond comprehension. Rebecca screamed. Blood streamed from her nose, from her eyes, from her ears. The creature wasn't attacking. It wasn't trying to kill them. It was waking up. And its thoughts alone were enough to destroy human minds. Above Blackwater Lake, every electrical system within 200 kilometers failed simultaneously. Entire cities went dark. Air traffic lost navigation. Emergency services collapsed. The night became black, completely black. Except for one thing, the city. The city beneath Blackwater Lake shone brighter than the stars. And at its center, something began climbing out of the depths. Something that even the creature feared. The creature beneath Blackwater Lake continued rising. The eye remained fixed on the ruins, on the collapsing city, on the humans who had accidentally broken the final barrier. Yet, despite its unimaginable size, something else was emerging. Something the creature itself feared. At first, Ethan thought it was another illusion, another impossible shape inside the glowing depths. Then, the creature reacted. For the first time, the eye moved, rapidly, almost nervously, watching something below, something deeper. The ancient voice returned, not angry, not triumphant, terrified. "It is coming." The words echoed through the lake, across the mountains, across the darkened sky. And suddenly, Ethan understood. The city had never been built to imprison the giant creature. The giant creature had been the jailer. The realization hit like a physical blow. Everything changed. The missing people, the city, the sacrifices, the watchers, the lights, the voices, all of it. Humanity had misunderstood the story. For centuries, the creature beneath the city was not the prisoner. It was the guard. And now the guard had failed. The water below exploded with movement. A crack opened beneath the creature. A darkness unlike any darkness Ethan had ever seen. Not black, absence, a void. A place where reality itself seemed incomplete. The enormous eye immediately turned toward it. The creature began retreating. Retreating. The being capable of swallowing cities was retreating. Then something emerged. A hand. At least Ethan thought it was a hand. The shape resembled fingers, but the scale destroyed comprehension. Each finger stretched farther than entire city blocks. The ruins trembled. The mountains trembled. The world trembled. And slowly, something began pulling itself upward. The missing people reacted immediately. Thousands appeared throughout the city. Every street, every rooftop, every tower. For the first time since their appearance, they looked alive. Not empty, not controlled, determined. The keepers, the guardians, the souls trapped inside Blackwater. They had one final task. Every light in the city ignited simultaneously. White, not green, pure white. The city became a beacon, a lighthouse visible from orbit. The ancient creature beneath the lake looked upward, toward the city, toward the keepers, toward humanity. Then Ethan heard a voice, a different voice, a voice he had never heard before, not through the radio, inside his mind. And somehow it sounded human. Help us. Thousands of voices joined it. Help us. The keepers, every missing person, every soul the city had taken, every guardian. They weren't asking for rescue. They were asking for sacrifice. Because only one thing could close the breach. Only one thing could rebuild the lock. Only one thing could put the city back where it belonged. Someone had to remain forever. And Ethan suddenly understood why every generation produced new names. Why the walls beneath the city contained future victims. Why the disappearances never stopped. The city demanded guardians, and guardians were always human. Rebecca understood it too. The look in her eyes said everything. The city had chosen, and it had chosen them.